So, the big question is this: how are ambitious people like us, who don't have a lot of resources, did not go to Ivy League colleges, were not born into wealth, how do we become resourceful enough, use our creativity, our dedication, and a little bit of crazy to bootstrap our way to realizing our dreams? Whether it is launching a new company, launching a new app, or making it to the top of the corporate ladder. That is the question, and this podcast will give you the answers. Please like, share, and subscribe to get new episodes, videos, and other updates. Welcome to another episode of Bootstrapping Your Dreams show. I'm your host, Manuj Aggarwal, and today we have Bruce Borenstein, an entrepreneur, an author, and we'll be talking about some common sense selling and how it is more effective than formula selling. So welcome, Bruce.
Thank you, Manuj.
We are excited to have you. So as I said, Bruce is an accomplished entrepreneur, businessman, leader, and an experienced CEO and president. He has tons of expertise in sales and marketing, and he has graciously consented for this interview and sharing all his knowledge and experience with us. All right, so let's get started. Bruce, can you first let us know a little bit about yourself, your background and experience, so that our audience can get to know you better?
Sure, I'd be happy to, Manuj. So I've been in the business of selling since 1974.
Wow.
Thank you for saying I don't look quite that old. But I actually started out as being a manufacturer's rep in the consumer electronics business, and really got involved in that as I was kind of a hi-fi enthusiast, and thought that, I like to talk to people and I think I can sell something. And so I started out by writing a lot of letters to some of the manufacturers whose addresses I got out of a hi-fi magazine.
Oh, okay.
And I think I sent out about 50 letters and I got all of one response.
Okay.
But the one response was a good one. And I was able to find out about the manufacturers repping a business, which to me was totally foreign. I had never heard of a manufacturer's rep before. And but I then got in contact with the principal of that particular agency, and I started my career. Graduated from college in May, and I started working in June. So,
awesome, that's great.
With no spaces in between. And from there, I wound up owning my own manufacturer's rep company in the consumer electronics space, and had a number of very high-profile manufacturers that I represented in upstate New York. And fortunately, upstate New York was not the greatest market. A lot of customers consolidated and went elsewhere, and so the buying offices were few and far between. And I then took my first position on the manufacturing side and became one of the founders of a company called Digital Innovations, which manufactured a device called the Skip Doctor, which for those of you that are old enough to remember, when there were CDs, they would get scratched.
I see.
And unfortunately, when they get scratched, they would skip. And this particular product was able to repair damaged CDs and DVDs when they were scratched.
That's
and
awesome.
just as a little an aside, that particular product became so popular. Best Buy was a significant customer for us.
Oh, cool.
So much so that when I started selling them the Skip Doctor, the people and the buyers in some of the other departments said, I want my own. So I had to come out with several different iterations of, in essence, what was the same product.
Wow.
So we had the DVD doctor for the DVD buyer, and we had the game doctor for the game buyer, and I had the photo doctor for the so it became 7 different SKUs, all essentially the same product.
Yeah.
But they were then merchandised in several different departments, and we went on to do several $1 million in business just with Best Buy.
That's awesome.
That company was VC, actually angel funded, and there was a change of management structure And then I went on to do some consulting work. And one of my clients was a company who at the time was known as Neat Receipts, now known as the Neat Company. And they were able to come out with a product that was a scanner software solution for digitizing paper. Primarily, the big focus was on automating the expense reporting function. And then was able to take them from zero to about $22 million in a little over 4 years. That was VC funded, and there was a change of management there, as happens many times.
Sure.
And from there, I went back into consulting and got a phone call from a friend who had a friend of his who knew of a Chinese manufacturer that wanted to go from being in the commercial business with their bone conduction headphones into the consumer business, but really had no idea on how to do that. He reached out to me because he knew that I had a lot of relationships in the consumer electronics business. And that started the company Aftershocks, which went on, again, took from zero to a little over $20 million in less than 5 years. And today they're very successful. I had an agreement with the Chinese manufacturer that this 5-year contract that I had, when it came to an end, they would have the option to buy me out, which they did. And that turned out to be very nice. And now I'm back. I did take retirement for about 6 months, and it unfortunately was very boring for me. So I've gotten back into the consulting business once again. And during that time, I also wrote a book called Don't Be a Schmeckel. And this is the book that really, in terms of what we're going to talk about today, is very apropos, because it does take a common sense approach to sales. And as I tell people, unfortunately, common sense is not so common.
Yeah, for sure.
And sometimes people need to kind of recognize that perhaps common sense is the best approach, not just for sales, but really for everything. And so my book kind of focuses on that approach.
That's amazing story. You've been selling longer than I've been alive, so obviously you have some experience.
For a lot of people, but again, I try not. When people say to me, they say, Bruce, how long have you been doing this? And now I stop at 30 years, because after that, then they start to think I'm too old to have any, any sense about me. So I say 30 plus years.
There's no alternative to experience. So for the uninitiated, for people who are not familiar with sales like myself, let's start by defining what is common sense selling versus what is formula selling. So what are these terms? What do you mean by these two terms?
Well, common sense is just what I mean. To be successful in sales, I really look at selling as it's not so much selling as it is facilitating buying, because you're dealing with somebody, and it doesn't really matter what the product is, but it's really about bringing a solution to somebody's attention, the buyer, if you will, and making them aware of the attributes of what it is that you're offering them that's going to provide them with an answer to a question or a product that they're looking for. And so rather than taking the approach of having to do a sales pitch, it really is a relationship building business that allows you to find out what it is that particular individual, that customer, is looking for, and then seeing how you fit into providing them with the solution that they want. And the formula selling tends to be more apt. You cannot make yourself into something that you're not. And if you need to go to create to learn a formula to do something, I really question whether you're going to be very good at it. It's like somebody wanting to become a doctor, but the problem is that they can't stand the sight of blood. Then you know what? Maybe you're not going to be a good doctor. Maybe you should find something else. Same is true with sales. If you're not if you're not a people person, if you don't relate well to people, if you don't enjoy, and I have a chapter in my book about that, about the passion. If you're not going to be passionate about what you do, perhaps that's not the right path for you to go down.
Yeah, for sure. That's well said. So passion is very important. But Let me ask you one question. Our audience is mainly startup founders and bootstrapping, bootstrapping their businesses. A lot of these folks tend to be introverts as well. So, even though they are passionate about sales and everything, so do you have any advice about, how they can overcome their own shyness or, introvert nature and make these relationships?
Well, again, I'm sure those entrepreneurs, they're maybe the people that came up with a product idea. I can go back to my experiences, say, with digital innovations. I was not the one who designed the product. And so it's important when you are a entrepreneur and your passion is more product oriented, but you're not very, you're introverted, as you say, you're not as people oriented. I think it's wise for you to find somebody who then can be part of your team as a founder, who does enjoy that part. And that's what I think it's really about, making the team. As an individual, everyone has certain skill sets where they're good at certain things and not so good at others. I'm not an engineer. The person who founded Digital Innovations was a mechanical engineer. But the marriage of somebody who has that skill set and then my skill set, which is then communicating with people and being able to present a product to not just the market, but let's face it, from a bootstrapping standpoint, the ability to raise money, whether it's a presentation to, angel investors or you're going in front of VCs, you need to have somebody who's able to present from a people standpoint the benefits of that product. And then you have the individual who was the engineer and designed it, speak to more of the attributes from the mechanical standpoint of what the product does. So that applies well for sure. Generally, what I also advise people, don't think about the what or the how are you going to do it, but who you can contact, who can sort of fill in the gaps that you have in your team. So that's, and build the team. Exactly.
Okay. All right. So let's now talk about some actionable advice. So how can one start to sell in a common sense way? What are some of the steps or mechanics of one can employ to start selling?
Well, I think the first thing from a common sense standpoint is, when you are dealing with someone, you're wanting to, and again, it depends on what you are selling. I've always been involved in selling a product that would be not just a one-off sale. It would be a sale that would happen multiple times. Buy product, sell that product, replenish that product. And so there, it's more about relationship selling. And building relationships is should be a common sense approach to building that relationship. You cannot force yourself, on somebody. And really what you're looking to do is you want to try to find a commonality and interest. And it may take on any number of, shapes and sizes. Maybe you both like fishing, or maybe you both like watching football. But that approach would be more to kind of find out where you have a common interest with the individual that you're speaking to. That does a couple of things. Number one, it allows you to have a conversation in unfortunately, sometimes selling can become a little adversarial, where, the person you're selling is looking at you as being almost like the enemy, because you're trying to get them to do something that they don't want to do. But that's not it at all. The common sense approach is, how do we find the common ground? How do we find what it is that you want to see accomplished as the buyer, and then have the person who is on the other side of the desk presenting to you a solution to what it is that you want to do, and the reason why you're sitting there talking to each other. People fail to realize that the process, the selling process, is about finding a solution for that individual. And I don't care if you're selling insurance or you're selling a widget or whatever it may be. If you're sitting across from somebody, clearly they have interest in what it is that you're, wanting to bring to them. And I think it's important that you start to do that by creating a relationship opportunity, even if the relationship may only be for an hour. But the point is that it is a relationship. And I think if people would take that approach, they would find that the success comes more naturally. And it's not as so much of a struggle. And quite frankly, you're going to have more successes because now you're doing it in a way that is comfortable, both for the person that you're dealing with as well as for yourself.
That's great. Now, one typical thing that I hear from accomplished salespeople is about this importance of listening. And I think when you're saying establish a relationship, I think that part of listening is an important aspect of it, isn't it?
Unquestionably. In fact, how can you find out what the problem that they're looking to solve, the product that they're looking for, unless you're listening? If you sit down, in fact, a good salesman is an excellent listener, because there's no way for you to determine the best approach to make this presentation to this other individual than to listen and hear what it is that they are actually looking for. Someone who comes into a sales presentation and just immediately goes into their PowerPoint deck without even establishing a better understanding of what that other individual is looking for is pretty much a path to not be successful. So yes, Manuj, I couldn't agree with you more. The listening aspect from a selling standpoint is critical.
Awesome. And now, are there any typical questions you tend to ask to extract that knowledge out of your prospect? Are there any common techniques you use that you can share?
Well, again, I really hate using the word technique, because technique has a very formula sound to it. It has a very, like it's there's a science involved here. And really, again, I go back to I like to think of when I'm going into a presentation that that individual and I are sitting in his or her living room. And we're having a comfortable type of a conversation to discover more about each other. It's always good to maybe, if you're having a morning meeting, I bring in a couple of coffees, and we're sitting there each having a cup of coffee, and just to try to make it, because the more comfortable that environment is, that selling environment is, the greater the likelihood to be successful. So to think in terms of technique, if you want to use that word, I think the technique would be the getting comfortable with the individual. I have a chapter, for example, in my book that's titled "Getting Comfortable with the Uncomfortable," because for some people, doing that can be uncomfortable. And the only way that you can be comfortable in doing it is to do it. As Nike says, just do it. And the more often that you do, the more comfortable you become, because it becomes second nature. And now, I didn't mean to use the word technique, but I think you answered the question. I was more sort of getting to some typical approaches that you use. So thanks a lot for clarifying that. Now, you said that you have worked typically in products related to consumer electronics or something that needs to be replenished. But I'm hoping that these approaches, they work across the board. Like, can you share something about that? Like, do they work in B2C scenarios, B2B scenarios, or are there typical niches that you recommend that these approaches? Absolutely. And again, the one area where it probably doesn't work is that some of your listeners may go to these VC events where they'll have 50 VCs out there, and they give you 30 seconds to make your elevator pitch. That's the toughest pitch of all. But I think I'll go back to say, if you're doing that and you only have 30 seconds or maybe a minute to do that, that's where the passion becomes very, very important. And you need to be very concise in what it is. As I like to tell people, if somebody asks you what time it is, don't tell them how to build a watch. Tell them. So if you have a product that solves a particular problem,
Yeah.
share what the problem is and say what your solution is to solve that problem, because you're not going to have much more time to do it. If you take the other approach, where you start to get involved in intricacies and the technical attributes, not only are you going to lose your listener, but you're probably not going to get invited to make a full-blown presentation to that potential VC. And as I like to tell people, maybe there's 50 VCs in the room, but you only need one. And if you get the opportunity to connect with the one that then will provide the funding you need to bring your product to market, you've been successful.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Now, you have led multiple sales organizations to multi-million-dollar sales. So as the business scales, how do you continue to nurture that relationship? How do you continue to to make sure it's growing with the business as well?
So I think it's very important to recognize that from a growth standpoint, I've always been a believer that growing too fast is almost as bad as not growing at all. Mm-hmm. And the reason why I say that is because from a number of different aspects. Cash certainly is true. Many times you can create many sales, but you don't have the financial wherewithal to support those sales.
Yeah.
So I think it's very important for any business to really plan what their needs are going to be, based upon the growth that they're expecting, and to recognize well in advance, particularly when it comes to a product which may have a long cycle in terms of from the time that you place the order with the manufacturer, or if you're doing the manufacturing yourself, to come out with the finished product, many times it's 90, 120, 150 days. And in those instances, this has been my experience in consumer electronics, you had to have the wherewithal financially to be able to get those dollars to the manufacturer for them to go ahead and build your product, and you may not see it for 60, 90, 120 days. Yeah. So it's very important to plan that growth so you can then scale that business. And if you have a more manageable growth curve, you get into a much stronger position to be able to generate the cash flow to support the business, instead of having to accumulate more or to go out and raise more equity, or put more debt on the balance sheet. Not that those are bad things; those are important things to any business to be able to succeed. But you need to plan for that. And so, because you're typically not in a position to turn on a dime when you find that business is so strong, and then you have to go back into the equity marketplace to raise more money. It's not going to potentially happen as quickly as your businesses. And so why I say that too fast a growth can be as bad as no growth at all is that you can put yourself in a situation where you've overcommitted yourself. Yeah. And if you want to talk about killing relationships, never want to overpromise and underdeliver.
That's
it's a very dangerous place to be.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. So that's very good advice. Now, how do you put it all together? So again, going back to the beginning, somebody who's starting off their business, how do you I guess put this approach together and accelerate your business slowly, in a sustainable manner? So I think you touched upon a few points there, but in the digital world, like a lot of people in our audience are entrepreneurs who are producing digital products. They are not physical products. So any advice related to that on how they can start to scale the business in a sustainable manner?
Well, the nice thing about when you're talking digital product as opposed to a physical product, the scalability, quite frankly, is much easier. Mm-hmm. And it's much easier because you are in a position to, if it's a software product, having additional downloads of that software, as long as your server capability can support that, becomes much easier than having that long lead time. My experience, obviously, has always been on the hardware side is the experience. And as a lot of people will say, myself included, hardware is hard. Yeah. And software, if you're talking digital-based products, is an easier way to go. But the bigger difference on that side of the equation is that the digital side, the software side, because it's a little bit easier, is also that much more competitive. And it is. I look at a software or an app or something that is much easier to scale. Usually is more competitive because people tend to look at that because it is easier. Okay, let me go after that. So there it becomes much more critical to become very unique, to try to do something in a different way, an easier way, that is easily, where a user interface is going to be much easier, or the software itself is going to be that much more powerful than what may be in the market previous. So, that's really the difference to me between a digital product, software product, and a hardware product.
All right, great. And now, are there any steps or things that people should avoid while selling or while adopting this common sense selling approach? Something that's a no-no, and you recommend not doing something.
Well, when we're talking selling and talking common sense, I think it's always advisable to put yourself in the shoes of the person that's on the other side of the table. I'll give you a couple of examples. One of the worst things to do is to finally get an appointment. And as I say, many times half the battle in presenting a product to a prospective buyer is getting the appointment. And once you get that appointment, okay, that's half the battle right there. Now, what are you going to do with the fact that you now have that appointment? I can tell you one of the worst things to do is to show up late, okay? And I have, in fact, it's the first chapter in my book, is called Lombardi Time. For those who don't know, Vince Lombardi, very famous head football coach for the Green Bay Packers. And he had what was known as Lombardi Time. And that meant that if he called a meeting for 7 o'clock, you showed up at 7:15, right? And what that does in this, and from a selling standpoint, that's important, because if you have a presentation and you have materials that you need to set up, you're going to do a PowerPoint presentation, you're going to show samples, you want to show up to that meeting 15 minutes earlier. And in that presentation room, before the buyer even gets in there, you want to be set and ready to go. Why? Typically, maybe you're going to have 30 minutes to make that presentation. Why would you want to take 10 minutes of that 30 minutes in terms of setting up all your stuff? Because now that 30-minute appointment is only 20 minutes. So you want to be able to maximize your time. If anybody walks away with anything, is to put yourself in the other shoes, be respectful of somebody else's time, because now you're showing yourself as being an advocate for that buyer. And what does that do for you? Well, that means that now there may be other people who have some product that's very similar to what it is that you're selling. What are we going to do to break the tie? More often than not, it comes down to the person and the trust element that other individual has. And what does he use to base that on? He bases that on the level of respect that you've shown by being there on time, by having everything at your disposal, by being very prepared and being able to answer questions that may come up in the presentation. I like to tell people that you want to know your competitor as well as you know yourself. Why? Because your ability to be able to know how you fit in to the picture becomes that much more valuable, because now the person that you're talking to recognizes that you not only know your product, but you know the product of the other people that he may be talking to. In the retail business, which is kind of where I come from, I always make it a point that if I'm going to be presenting a product, let's use Best Buy as an example. Anybody in the consumer electronics business wants to sell to Best Buy. You want to go into a Best Buy store, you want to go look at what's on the shelf that your competitors are selling, and you want to figure out, okay, how do I fit into this planogram? What are the attributes of my product compared to some of the other products that are already out there that they're already selling? How can I make the case that this particular my product belongs on your shelf? Maybe it's, at the expense of somebody else's product, or maybe he's given 4 peg hooks to a single product I'm saying, let me have one. I can outperform what you were getting out of 4 with 1. But you need to do your homework. You need to be prepared. And so when you go to make that presentation, you can speak from a position of strength because you know what it is that you're going up against. And based on my experiences, there isn't a buyer alive who's not going to appreciate the fact that you came in to make that presentation better prepared, perhaps than anybody they've ever seen before, because you're using common sense. The other people who may have gotten in there before, they don't operate that way.
Yeah. Oh, okay, great. Now, you've been in this game for a long, long time. So have you seen anything change in terms of, the tools you use, the approaches you use, or the way that you
yes.
conduct? Yeah.
Well, not the least of which, when I first started out in this business, everything was on paper. And so if you were doing something, you gave somebody a brochure, or and now of course everything is digital. So, some of one of the best tools, everybody would say from presenting is PowerPoint or something similar. The problem is that you don't want to use PowerPoint, and the worst thing that anybody wants to hear when you're talking to them and you're making a PowerPoint presentation is you reading from the slide, right? So boring. So what you want to do is you just want to use that as an adjunct to what your verbal presentation is going to be. And you want to be, and it doesn't matter whether, again, what the product is. It could be a hardware product, it could be a software product, it could be a one-off sale. The point is, if you know what it is that you're selling, you shouldn't have to be reading from the PowerPoint presentation that you're giving. So that's probably one of the biggest differences. And I go back in time. There are so many electronic tools that are available, and it's important, I think, for today's salesperson. And really, I think it would be very unusual for someone to not have familiarity with all of those electronic digital tools that are available to make that process better. I started out, we didn't have email. When the fax machine came out, that was a big, I'm really dating myself. But that was a big deal. But it is so much easier now to communicate. Just you and I even having this conversation right now on a video presentation was not something that was readily available. And so if you didn't have the ability to make a face-to-face presentation, you didn't have a presentation. But that said, I would caution that don't allow these digital tools that are great become a crutch for what, to me, still represents the best way. It's very difficult to build a relationship digitally. So don't let it substitute for a face-to-face meeting with someone.
For sure. But overall, do you think things have become easier, like selling has become easier because of these tools being available and all the technology that is available at our disposal?
It has become easier if they're used properly. It cannot become a substitute for common sense and ways to interact. If you're just going to rely and think that the answer, to your situation is going to be, I have a digital tool, I can have a video conference, I can use a PowerPoint presentation. Don't become too reliant on it. Always still look to to relationship selling and whatever that involves.
All right, there you go. So I just wanted to point out to all the people in the audience who are sort of sitting on the sidelines to jump in and and just go for it, as you said, because these tools are available and it's easy to get started. All right. And now, is there anything else that I haven't asked you about common sense selling? Something that you may want to share with the audience?
Well, I think some things that are important in terms of common sense selling and actually getting more opportunities to sell is the network that you create for yourself. I wrote an article not too long ago for Money Inc. magazine speaking about kind of what I call a network bank account. And it's the more people that you meet and the more people that you connect with, the better the likelihood that good things are going to happen from that network. And it may not even be from that person that you met, but it may be from somebody that person knows. So I always like to speak to to the ability to network. The other thing I always like to speak to is never to stop learning. Here's a guy like me. I've been doing this, as I was saying earlier, 30 plus years. But I never stop learning because there's always, and whether it's from a technology standpoint or the ability to know about new things that are happening in the marketplace, never ever stop learning. Always involve yourselves in ways that you can become wiser and smarter tomorrow than you were today. I think that's a very important thing for people to stay focused on.
That's very well said.
And it's a valuable thing that will pay dividends for you down the road.
Sure. That's very well said. Thank you so much, Bruce, for this fantastic interview. I'm sure everybody in the audience got a lot of value out of it. Can you talk about your company?
Sure.
And
the book is called, the book has a very humorous title. It's called Don't Be a Schmeckle. And the Schmeckle has multiple meanings for, it's a Yiddish word. It means a couple of things. One, it means is a penis, but it also means when somebody is a Schmeckle, they're not a smart person, maybe bordering on being an idiot. So the point is, when you talk common sense, you don't want to be the Schmeckle. You want to be the smart guy. And the book itself, I mentioned a couple of the chapters, but basically it speaks to all the different ways that you can help yourself use common sense to sell, because it's the little things that you do that makes a difference and separates you from your competitors. So available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Kobo, et cetera, online. And I would highly recommend that if you have interest in common sense selling, that this can become a very good read for you. And it's not just for the new person who's out there selling. It's also for people that have been out there for a while. Maybe they need to sharpen their skills a little bit. I think this will help them great.
That's awesome. I'll get a link for that book, Amazon link, and then I'll put that in the show notes so that people can.
I'd appreciate that.
And
Thank you very much.
You also want to talk about your company, PH Advisors. Do you want to?
Sure. So PH Advisors is a business acceleration company. And what I do, we were talking earlier about somebody who's out there, has a brilliant mind, a passionate engineer, but needs to be able to say, all right, how do I take this product and bring this product to market? I've done this successfully for many, many years, and my company, PH Advisors, does that. My website tells more about me. It has some, talks about some of the successes that I have. It's phadvisors.com. And if, people are looking for someone to assist them to help their business get jump-started, I'm always happy to assist.
Awesome. That's great. And do you work with, people who are just starting off, like, may not have a lot of funding, or is it a certain
I do.
company?
What I've done, in fact, I'm very active in my trade association, the Consumer Technology Association, and I'm a mentor. And what typically we do, we provide for other members who are new businesses, we provide them 30 minutes of no charge mentorship.
Awesome.
And there's so many different ways. If they don't have a lot of funding, it could be an equity play. It could be a deferred payment play, or a mix of both. So there's always flexibility involved in terms of putting a program together for a new company. My business has always been focused on startup companies, so I'm very used to doing that.
Awesome. That's great. Thank you so much, Bruce. It has been a pleasure having you on this show. Thank you so much.
Pleasure to talk to you and to your viewers and listeners. Thank you, Manuj.
So again, I'm Manuj Aggarwal, and thanks a lot for joining us on Bootstrapping Your Dreams show. And now, if you are an existing or an aspiring technology entrepreneur, then I invite you to check out my new online workshop, Bootstrapping Your Tech Startup Dreams. Go to go.tetranoodle.com/boot-podcast and sign up for free. I want to make sure more successful and sound decisions are made every day in your tech projects. Let's start finding solutions to your problems. So go to go.tetranoodle.com/boot-podcast, and I look forward to helping you with your tech startup.